So that's basically the plan. I want to watch this video. It's from Havoc616, prominent, good OG member of the PoE community. Has been around for a long time. It's a big shout out to Havoc. I'm going to link this video in the chat for you guys as well. This is the video. I'll be watching this, and I've heard good things about it. I've been linked this video since yesterday night, so let's just crack into it. The graphic is so good.
It is important to note this video is primarily based on my March and June playthroughs, meaning that come early access on December 6th, the game most likely will be different, and any feedback given in this video may have already been addressed. On that note, the primary goal of this video is to, of course, provide feedback to GGG, emphasizing gameplay and design elements that stood out to me, but secondarily, for the players and community, I hope I can further the discussion on some recurring topics, especially in regards to combat. Now, with that settled, my opinion on Path of Exile 2 after 12 hours of playtesting is Path of Exile 2 is good, and Path of Exile 2 is its own unique game. If I had to give 3 additional reasons to play PoE 2, they would be meaningful combat, improved accessibility, and higher intensity boss fights. To expand, the combat versus trash monsters has a mix of both zoom and challenging encounters.
That's a good take, actually.
Accessibility has been improved without removing depth, simply by hiding complexity. And endgame level boss fights can be experienced.
That's actually really interesting. I keep talking about that a lot, about how they keep the complexity, but they remove the unnecessary difficulty to understand it. So, like, an example of this is when you choose a skill gem, like you get the uncut skill gems, you click on it, now your character will be able to make a skill gem. It will actually give you or prompt you with a list of suggestions that is for your class, but that might not necessarily be what you want to play, but that's what's recommended. And then you can change that screen to choose skills from other classes, right? And then same thing with support gems. If you open up an uncut support gem, it will then give you a list of recommended support gems that will work for the skills that you have. And that's the first window. Now you can press a button to disable this and literally be spammed with the, you know, the plethora, the river, the ocean, a tsunami of different support gems that you get to choose from, which will be overwhelming and hard to understand and grasp if it's going to work or if it's going to be good for new and newer players. However, the way they've done it now is that the first thing you'll see is a recommended list, which will help new and newer players understand and grasp the game. I think it's really good. And that's not removing the complexity and the difficulty of it. They're not removing the complexity of it, but what they're doing is that they're giving you a good interface UI design way to help new and newer players understand what they can and can't do
during the campaign. In terms of changes, I'm looking to see improvements to the following systems during early access. The first being mana. As a player, I just don't believe resource sustain is a compelling problem to solve, especially because it feels bad when you can't cast your skills. Secondly, crafting. I believe PoE 2 has an opportunity to bridge the gap in itemization capability between an experienced endgame player and a new player journeying through the game for the first time.
So what I know that they said about crafting is that they don't want any crafting method to remove power from an item, but rather alter or add power. So what they mean with that is that they don't want to have any sort of orbs, like in PoE 1 we have scour orbs or annulment orbs, right? That either removes all of the modifiers from the item or removes a modifier from the item. Instead, every crafting method is either removing one and replacing it with a new one or adding a modifier. So it's always going to make the item stronger is the essential baseline idea. What that it does, it actually emphasizes the idea of looting items from the ground, right? So you want to add power to items. This way, it's easier to understand for new and newer players, but it also emphasizes the interest and attractiveness of actually looting items on the ground. So that's the way they've said that the craft's going to work. Again, I've played just as much as Havoc when it comes to PoE 2, so we don't know, and we don't know how much of these things are going to change from what we've seen to the actual early access release on the 6th of December.
And third, further development of meaningful combat. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because it's actually amazing. And I see significant potential for it to get that much better, especially as you get more tools and options to defeat various encounters. Now, during this introduction, I will be reviewing my March Ranger playtest, discussing atomization, gearing, and gameplay decisions, overviewing Ranger build archetypes, and in addition to the main run, analyzing how my 2 bonus speedruns went. Furthermore, I will also be examining and challenging various design choices, such as the disenchant system or meaningful combat, and drawing comparisons between the March and June versions of the game to hopefully make progress on the following questions. How hard should the game be? And how fast should the game play? I'm curious, by the end of the video, if you'll agree with my conclusions. If not, I'd love to hear what your opinions are. With that being said, let's get into it. Starting with the March playtest, immediately after, I was concerned with the scarcity of items and overall just slower paced gameplay. In that version of the game, the best way to speed things up was to slowly collect gold, to eventually gamble for weapons at the vendor, a tiresome but necessary task. However, in the June playtest, I felt this concern was addressed, with both item drops and gold feeling more plentiful. The gameplay was also fast.
I will say this actually on the drop stuff. It's actually something that they've done, which I would not know unless Jonathan told me. Is that when you go to I don't know exactly like where these things are, but Jonathan told me that when you go to, let's say, the first zone, and in this zone there will be a random rare monster. You don't know where or how it is, so it's not going to be having any indicators, but that one rare is guaranteed to drop XYZ items. And in some cases, that would be a specific flask to help you upgrade your flask, or it would be an uncut skill gem to make sure the player gets access to uncut skill gems. And what happens then is if you don't happen to engage with that rare in that zone and kill it, that same rare or that guaranteed drop will then be on a new rare in your next zone. And I didn't know about this, but every time I played, once they made some of the loot changes, every playthrough I did felt amazing with itemization. I felt like I was given the tools I needed to progress, and it felt amazing because it felt like a natural progression. Then I heard this from Jonathan. He told me like, this is how we set that up. They don't tell you about it. You don't feel like you're looking for it. It just happens naturally. And if you accidentally miss that guy, it will be available in the next zone, so that the odds or the risks of you not engaging with that is extremely small, allowing you to be having this natural gear progression in a very, very comfortable way without the game saying, hey, we're going to give you a hand. Here you go. Instead, when you kill the rare, you're like, oh shit, I got this. And it feels good, which is insane how that small thing, without that communication of it, it just feels really good that way. That's a natural
and our
gearing.
characters were much stronger, which of course felt great, but also fair. Fair because if I started playing too aggressively, I would eventually get checked, because both trash monsters and bosses would fight back.
Yeah.
Which from my perspective, allowed the game to create periods of higher paced blasting that was kept in balance by tougher encounters that require strategic gameplay to move onward. This combat dynamic is fundamental to what made my PoE2 playthrough so engaging, which is why I'll be emphasizing and expanding on it throughout the video. But before I do, let's shift gears and get into the main Ranger run. Loading into the riverbank, the first thing I need to talk about is this insane level 1 chest from the Bloated Miller. Life, cold res, and stun threshold are all great stats, but the biggest game changers on this item are actually the 17 energy shield and 2.6 life regen per second. These recovery modifiers significantly reduce the impact of chip damage during both boss fights and trash clear, meaning more time spent blasting and less time spent healing in town. That being said, recovery stats and professional speedrunning skills are not enough to rush into level 4 zone early. The werewolf prowlers inside the old forest hit a bit too hard for level 2 almost 0 gear character. However, when I returned to the old forest later as a level 4 character with just a 17 armor helmet, 22 evasion from this chest, and double the life regen with the crimson amulet, the werewolves were significantly more manageable, which underscores the importance of gearing, notably in regards to upgrading item bases during progression and not skimping out on defensive layering, a theme that I found constantly emphasized in both the Ranger and Monk run.
Same
now,
in the Witch
adjacent to
run.
gearing is vendoring and the new Disenchant system. In Path of Exile 1, when you vendor an item, you generate transmutation, alteration, or alchemy shards. However, in Path of Exile 2, vendoring an item simply offers gold, and shard generation has been moved to a separate vendor. First question that comes to mind is why? Why create a new system? As a player, this just sounds like one more thing to do every trip to town. But holding off judgment for just a moment and looking at the balance. Currently, disenchanting a magic item provides one transmutation shard, and disenchanting a rare provides one alchemy shard. 20 magic items for one transmutation orb that might not hit isn't exactly the most appealing offer, and finding 20 rares in the first place is a tough ask. In this version of the game, the best way to find upgrades outside of lucky drops was gambling, which meant saving 300 to 600 gold or more per desired item slot, a task that wasn't too difficult since items sold for 10 to 70 gold each. With this level of tuning, the disenchant system was practically irrelevant, offering no alternative for acquiring upgrades. So with that in mind, if the developers wanted players to consider the trade-off between accumulating gold and gambling versus sacrificing gold for orbs and crafting on high-level bases, then the obvious solution is to naturally provide more shards. Which, to be fair, is something they might have already done by enabling higher item level gear to disenchant for more.
Yeah.
Still, while the system might be fine, my preference is towards Path of Exile 1's automatic vendor system, simply because it avoids additional town downtime and extra decision making, which ultimately means more time spent fighting monsters. Moving onward, the systems and the quantity of orbs you generate during the campaign directly relate to defensive balance. Currently, if I'm constantly upgrading my gear to the latest item bases and equipping the appropriate resist jewelry, regardless of the affixes on my items, campaign progression feels fair. My potential concern is, if say alchemy orbs are plentiful, we might run into a situation where the balance team deems that well-rolled rare items are required to smoothly progress ahead. And while it's likely that will be the case in later acts or early mapping content, it's worth considering how the amount of necessary gearing impacts the overall campaign experience. Right now, the level of minimum viable gearing in Acts 1 and 2 feels well balanced and enjoyable, especially
Agreed.
so in the June iteration of the game. The progression from quest to quest, boss to boss, and zone to zone was challenging, but also fun. There's this constant feeling of forward momentum, which I believe was only possible because of two factors. There was no need to excessively refarm a prior zone, which would have broken immersion, and there was no pressure to overgear for any encounter.
I didn't
So
feel that on the
expanding on
Witch
these two
either.
factors, we can take a look at this dynamic in Path of Exile 1. In PoE 1, new players often full clear zones, overleveling and overgearing much more than necessary, whereas
True.
experienced players will often take the shortest path through zones, progressing quicker with less gear.
Mhm.
For myself, the slow gear playstyle is what makes PoE 1 challenging and fun, and in the same respect is what made my PoE 2 playthrough just as enjoyable. Now on the flip side, the developers can still choose to design challenging encounters while also necessitating an above average amount of gear. However, I have to circle back that if the process of acquiring that gear is not engaging, it may disrupt the flow of gameplay. Which leads me to a new thread, crafting, and raises the following question: how can crafting be engaging, but also accessible, while retaining the depth and complexity that PoE players desire? Honestly, I don't have the answer to this, because my favorite form of crafting is
I'm not sure if the majority of PoE 1 players actually like the complexity and depth of crafting. Because most people I talk to and engage with, they're all very upset about the craft. It's like, nah, I don't want to craft too hard. Because it's so much to learn. It's insane. I love crafting. It's like the one main thing I do every league. I fucking love it. And I do everything, including mirror item service crafting. Like, I love doing that shit. But most people don't. It's super in-depth, super complex, super difficult. But I'm not sure if everybody likes it. But then again, there are different types of crafting. Chat's mentioning right now, we got access to essence crafting, rogue crafting, harvest crafting, etc. And then we have, the people that do everything. So I don't know. I think that it's a special topic for sure.
is identifying an item off the ground, potentially adding a craft, and blasting ahead with no downtime. I believe it would be interesting if a player or content creator that is well experienced with endgame crafting offered their thoughts on how they might implement it. I also wonder to what degree crafting as a system needs to be in the campaign, as the current gameplay loop is quite engaging without it. Perhaps crafting and the scaling of its complexity is best suited for maps, where small periods of downtime already exist. Zooming back out to playstyle, right now in the current PoE 2 balance, you can create a similar experience to PoE 1 by refarming zones or bosses to outgear the content. While in contrast, if you farm each zone and boss once, your character will naturally have less gear, which leaves you with a decision: play slow and safe, or to challenge yourself to blast and survive. And this challenge to survive, while blasting as fast as possible, I believe is what makes Path of Exile 2 unique.
Baby.
Now, I could expand on strategic combat for quite a while, discussing when you can zoom and when you can just jump in and blow stuff up. But for the brevity of this video, I'll pick just one aspect of it, which is dodge roll, and how that leads to another design area with potential room for further improvement. So in this clip, you can see that I'm in the Mud Burrow, a very narrow zone, and as I'm progressing forward, I encounter this big pack with a ton of skeletons, And what's interesting here is that when I dodge roll through them, I shove the skeletons out of the way, which feels good. But immediately after, since mobs are dying slowly, I have to make a decision. I can kite backwards where I know it's safe, or I can push forward into the unknown to progress ahead and get to the zone boss faster. Naturally, as a speedrunner, I chose the latter. Unfortunately, though, actions have consequences, and I get surrounded here by hard-hitting mud simulacrum. So to maintain forward progression, I try to dodge roll through the 2 simulacrum above me, which I can't, leading to my quick demise. As an experienced player, I can recognize that this death was my fault, but I suspect for newer players, this might not be so obvious. At the very least, they might feel confused or even frustrated with either the mechanics or the feel of the game. Now, this problem, which I'll define as a lack of agency,
Didn't Jonathan say that you have to play a character a long time for you to understand and grasp the flow of it? And your individual skills on playing XYZ character is going to change what you're capable of doing with it. Essentially, practice makes perfect, is what they're saying, right? I think Jonathan said that. I might be wrong.
is evident in the June update as well, even in wide open zones. Currently, if you pull too large of a pack, you might get swarmed and surrounded, and some might argue that this adds a level of challenge, but I would counter, this challenge is only 2-dimensional. Those 2 dimensions being that you either pull small packs of enemies and take care of them one at a time, or you should just YOLO jump in, button mash, and pray. If you ask me, meaningful combat should offer more than just these 2 options, involving decision making both before and during the action. Now if I cooked for a moment, what if dodge roll had phasing? Without phasing, aggressive gameplay is punished and slow gameplay is encouraged, removing multiple dimensions of skill expression. Introducing dodge roll phasing could encourage more aggressive playstyles, allowing players to bite off more than they can chew, while still having the ability to outplay the situation. Furthermore, it may open up additional design space for the developers to explore. This change alone might reduce the current emphasis on overly cautious gameplay and benefit your
I definitely agree that it would benefit new players, the statement with facing. I think that it would make the game easier. I like the fact that the only iframes you have on roll is for projectiles. You still take damage from AoE based damage sources and stuff like that. And I like the more we're playing a game, but I will use the word realistic approach to it. I like the fact that like you can't dodge roll through an enemy like that. Like I think I think it makes it feel better. And we are aware of it. You'll have to actually play around this specific case. And it also, most importantly, makes it that every battle, including so-called easy monsters, actually poses an actual threat to you. And I like
players
that person.
who might not recognize the need for careful positioning and movement. All that being said, this might just be a skill issue, because in Acts 2 and onward, we had way more skill gems available. It's entirely possible I already had the tools at my disposal, and I was simply unaware of how to use them. Which is a sentiment echoed by Jonathan Rogers, the game director of Path of Exile 2, who mentioned in a recent interview that you really need to spend time playing a character to fully understand how it works.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, like I
Without
said.
that experience, getting destroyed is a likely outcome. Changing gears, we need to talk about mana, especially when you don't have it. The problem is, when you don't have it, you can't play the game. And that really is the key point. I understand resource management is a tool to balance the game, however, as a player, I've never found it to be a compelling problem to solve. In this clip in the background, you'll notice I've been low on mana for quite a while, and because of the town portal animation, I could not portal out. My only option at the time was to roll away while attempting to lose aggro with the mobs, then portal out and refill my flasks. This took over 40 seconds, which is frankly frustrating. Now they did update flasks in the June playtest, but it still wasn't enough. That said, this might have only been a monk problem. All of the monk players I spoke to were grumbling about it, with some even specking mana nodes on the passage tree and still not solving it. Either way, I'm looking forward to more improvements here in the future. Changing focus from conceptual
I never had that
topics,
issue with a
let's
witch.
discuss ranger builds. In this playtest, ranger builds can be sorted into 2 themes, lightning and chaos, with lightning builds being further broken down into 2 variants. The first variant is the simple combo between lightning rod and lightning arrow. Lightning rod shoots an arrow into the sky that remains in the ground for 12 seconds after it lands. This ground embedded arrow then releases AoE lightning bursts every time it's hit by chaining lightning beams. Conveniently, lightning arrow fires chaining lightning beams that can chain into the lightning rod arrows, creating multiple lightning burst explosions based on the number of lightning rod arrows previously shot. Now in this version of the game, most monsters were fairly tanky, so higher damage combos like this were strongly incentivized. That being said, also in this version of the game, Stormcaller Arrow in combination with Herald of Thunder could recreate one-button gameplay. And what's interesting is, at the time, I considered this a balance issue, because if a one-button build was too strong, it would likely get nerfed. Yet that perception was based on my prior understanding that combo gameplay was the end-all be-all method of achieving meaningful combat. However, after the June playtest, playing a monk and clearing multiple screens in a row with mostly one button, I realized that meaningful combat doesn't necessarily require combo gameplay, it's just one avenue to achieve it. In future versions of the game, I can see a world where one button gameplay still exists,
Yeah,
because by
for
shifting
sure.
the focus away from the player and more onto the monsters, combat can remain both engaging and strategic with the right combination of varied monster packs and enemies that actually fight back. Anyways, I did say I was going to talk about builds, but I just
So I definitely think that's a good take. It's been very clear that it's there. There seems to be a lot of openings for one button builds, which a lot of people actually want, but they're not losing this whole complexity and the challenges you face with the enemies because of the fact that the enemy still poses threats to you. Because in PoE 1, for example, just to give that as a direct comparison, you're going to be in a position where you just want to kill shit as soon as possible. You want to kill them before they even touch you. You don't really have that happening to the same extent in PoE 2. So every fight, even like the easier fights, still poses a threat that you actually have to engage in a meaningful combat with them. Whether or not you have a combo build, combo set gameplay toolkit of your actual DPS output, or if it's a one button build, does not matter. The fact that you're still actually actively playing the game in every fight sequence and scenario makes it engaging, and that's through the monsters to
just
achieve
couldn't
that.
help myself there. Moving on to the Chaos Ranger build, I end up playing a Poison Dot variant with the 3 skills Poison Burst Arrow, Toxic Growth, and Vine Arrow. This was a combo build and it worked as so. Toxic Burst drops pods on the ground, which then light up and explode when hit by a Poison Burst Arrow, as long as there's at least one monster above the pod when hit. To attack multiple pods at once, Poison Burst Arrow was linked to multiple projectiles and pierce, and for more damage, Toxic Growth was linked to poison. This combo could chunk bosses, but in comparison to Lightning Rod and Lightning Arrow, it was much more difficult to use, because more focus was required to maximize pod overlap, while also predicting boss movement and avoiding monster one-shot abilities. Now both builds did benefit from Vine Arrow, which would help by tethering to bosses and slowing them down. But if I was put on the spot and had to choose a build for a new ranger to run, I would pick the Lightning variant for 2 main reasons. The first being that the jump back from Toxic Growth messed with my positioning much more than I would have liked, which I might have been okay with if the pod's conditional is a monster buff check, had a larger area in combination with a larger explosion radius. But secondly, instantaneous damage and the ability to attack from afar just feels good. Now transitioning to Speedrun 1, it was a low gear playstyle attempt that selected Escape Shot from the first uncut skill gem, with the goal of using it as a movement skill, and an ambitious secondary goal to clear while moving. The mobility was great when it worked, except when it didn't. It was very easy to use the skill gem and not go anywhere. As for clearing while moving, that was definitely a bit too ambitious, simply because with a starting bow and no extra flat damage on gear, I could not one-shot monster packs in this version of the game. Still, the ability to freeze monsters was useful, and conceptually, having tools like this to deal with swarms of enemies is something I can appreciate and agree with. Progressing ahead, since this was my second character, I was able to find the Mud Barrow and subsequently the Devourer rather quickly. However, the fight itself was quite difficult. No life regen, 2 life flasks, and low damage meant it was a battle of attrition, aka just don't get hit. But what if I could freeze the boss? In PoE2, the chance to apply ailments is based on the magnitude of the damage done, which I believe we can visually see by looking at any individual ailment box. So in theory, if I hit 3 to 4 escape shots, I could have frozen the boss. Yet, it wasn't worth it, because it was too easy to get stunned, and since I didn't have any combos at this point, I couldn't take advantage of the fact that the boss wasn't moving. Furthermore, even if the boss was moving, I could for the most part still maximize my damage uptime with WASD and attack move. Now I have to note, after reviewing the fight, the stun issue was a skill issue. If we watch the footage closely, we can see the Devourer's arm winding up, telegraphing the ability, meaning I could have dodge rolled first and then used the escape shot for a potential freeze. Still, how did the overall fight go? Well, as I said earlier, it was a battle of just don't get hit, which I was pretty good at, except for when this happened. Alright, round 2, let's try that again.
It's funny because I remember Preach Gaming told us at one of the LA events where there were game journalists rage quit during this fight after 40 minutes of dying, went to eat, came back to try it for another half hour, 40 minutes, and then rage quit and left the fucking venue and did not come back. This is the fight that we're doing.
Just don't get hit. Anyways, escaping to Speedrun 2, we had some interesting drops, notably this Iron Ring and Fire Arrow Quiver. Just like PoE 1, flat damage is incredibly important for attack-based builds, and in PoE 2
Yeah.
is no different, with these two items almost doubling my damage, giving me the confidence to progress ahead to the old fields, a zone overrun with swift striking werewolves, whose swarming nature had previously forced me to retreat during the main run. But with my newfound damage, I can now 2 to 3 shot normal monsters instead of the prior 4 to 6, meaning I could play much more aggressively, dodge rolling through packs to clear as fast as possible.
Journalist
At the end of
successfully
the zone, I
filtered.
encountered this evasive werewolf pack, which would not fall over quickly, forcing me to play at range, which introduced a new problem, because there's a second, much larger type of werewolf, which when playing at range, instead of simply chasing and swiping at you, like most wolves, would actually leap swipe instead, doing considerably more damage, with this one wolf repeating it 5 times in a row. Now zooming out slightly, without iron rings, fire arrow quivers, or even an insane weapon, the level of clear speed experienced in Speedrun 2, especially so in the first 2 zones, or as a monk in the June update, is the default balance baseline I desire. However, the more I review the footage, the more apparent it becomes that I could have been blasting in the March version of the game if I was more readily using my combos and was more knowledgeable in regards to monster AI and monster abilities.
And that goes back to, again, yeah, okay, he's actually going to say it, which makes you circle back to Jonathan's statement. Exactly, never mind. I'll just watch the video.
Statement that you need to spend some time playing a character to really understand how it works, and now I believe the sentiment also applies to monsters. Said differently, Path of Exile 1 is the player's world. You become a screen-clearing powerhouse, and the game becomes an arcade blasting experience. Whereas Path of Exile 2 is the monster's world. We're just living in it.
That was a good take.
Looping back to the introduction, I posed 2 questions. How hard should the game be, and how fast should the game play? And in review of the discussion so far, I've mostly discussed pacing, and lightly discussed challenge, a subset of what hard is. Which is the big question. What does hard even mean? I've been trying to find an answer for quite a while, but defining hard is hard, because everyone has their own definition of hard.
True.
That said, for myself, hard is the challenge, and when I look at my most challenging moments, they are also my most memorable. So to attempt to answer the question, I believe the game should not be easy, rather it should be difficult. Because if it's too easy, there's no sense of accomplishment, and the experience might become forgettable.
And that is a problem Diablo 4 currently has. I think that most of us that played Diablo since launch, Diablo 4, some of the most memorable moments, at least for me, was pre-nerf Season 0 Uber Lilith. Still remember the fight. It was, woo! I love that shit. And once he killed it, I'll still remember that kill. And ever since, there's not really been anything challenging in that same degree outside of unlimited scaling of the pit. And it's like, that's the best moment. I love that aspect of it. That's it.
Whereas if the game
I
is
remember
hard
it
and tuned appropriately, the challenges can be both aspirational and memorable. I hope I don't beat endgame bosses on my first try. I hope I really have to struggle with some of them. I hope that there are pinnacle bosses that are so hard that if beaten, can provide a huge sense of achievement. And knowing the developers, I believe this is what we can expect. Now moving on to pacing, the more I think about it, the more I realize it doesn't actually matter. What matters is the level of engagement, the flow of combat, the interest I have in my character, the puzzles I solve along the way, not how fast I clear a map. 20 seconds versus 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. What matters is if I'm having fun.
Yeah.
And based on my experience so far, PoE 2 delivers. That said, the actual experience is more meaningful than anything I can say. Whether or not it jives with you, that's for you to decide. Anyways, early access should be here on December 6th, and if you can't already tell, even with my reservations, I'm on the hype train. New game, new builds, new monsters, new everything. If you want more footage, you can check out my June playthrough here, and my Ranger boss footage here. Lastly, GGG is live streaming everything you need to know about Path of Exile 2 on November 21st. So until then, thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day, Exiles. Bye.
Bye. This is Havoc616. Big shout out to him. Here, let me share the video again in the chat. This is the video we just watched. Make sure you guys give a like, and don't forget to comment. Always helps the algorithm. No, this is a good video. Like, it's a really good video. I like Havoc. Has really good takes on it. Yeah. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content as well, and don't forget to check out Havoc's video, and I'll catch you guys in the next ones. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.